having the opportunity or making the opportunity to live your life in the way that you love the most.
Welcome to the Soom Podcast, where we share stories, insights, and tools to help you live a happier life. Hello everyone, this is Soom. Today I'm really excited to have this guest, my teacher, mentor, and a dear friend, Michael Harrison. Michael is a composer and pianist and a Guggenheim Fellowship recipient. His recent release, Seven Sacred Names, was called Music of Positively Intoxicating Beauty in the New Yorker, and Justed Constellations, recorded by Grammy-winning Roomful of Teeth, was among NPR's Best 100 Songs of 2020. Time Loops was among NPR's Top 10 Classical Album of 2012. And his work, Revelation, achieved international recognition and inclusion in the Best Classical Recordings of 2007 selections of the New York Times and Boston Globe. Hi, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing great, Soom. So nice to hear your voice and to be here on your podcast.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today. I really wanted to invite you to my podcast because I've been working with you and learning from you for a while. Whenever I see you working on your music and teaching, I can see the pure joy in your face. And I always wanted to kind of have that as well. So I wanted to invite you, and maybe you can share how music has influenced your life. First of all, I wanted to know how you got into music.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I come from a math science family. My grandfather was the dean of science at MIT, and he specialized in the study of light. And my father was a creative mathematician, did abstract algebra and created his own formulas and wrote papers and things like that. And he taught at the University of Oregon. Both my grandfather and my dad, who were kind of the seminal figures in my family, loved music and understood the basics of music. So they both knew about music theory because music theory relates so much to mathematics and physics. I started piano lessons when I was about 6 years old, but unfortunately I had a very kind of strict traditional teacher that seemed more concerned about how I was holding my hands than about reading the notes on the page than about anything to do with the joy or spirituality or creative elements in music. So after a period of time, I remember coming home one day and crying, asking my parents if they quit. And I think the good thing was that they did let me quit because otherwise I might have developed a hate for music. But some years later, I started really listening to a lot of music and going to the piano. We still had the piano in the house and making up my own songs. And then my dad showed me how to create chords. And that's when the light bulb really went off for me in music, when I understood how I could take what I was doing in one key and transpose it to another key, and how I could create different harmonies and improvise around them. So I started doing that, and then my parents offered for me to take lessons again, which I did, and we found better teachers, and I studied both classical piano and jazz. And high school, I was really into rock music, especially progressive rock.
I didn't know
And
that.
yeah, and I played keyboards and synthesizer and organ, and I played piano. Piano was always kind of my main instrument. And then I had really an amazing experience. I'd say my first passion in life, even before music, was mountain climbing and skiing and being in nature. So, because I grew up in Eugene, Oregon, which is a really beautiful place for mountain climbing and hiking and skiing and whatnot. So I got an opportunity to go trekking in the Himalayas when I was 15, and with a group from my school. And it was really a kind of life transforming experience to be way up in the Himalayan mountains and to encounter the Tibetan refugee villages, and just to see that life could be completely different than how I had grown up in a small town in America. So, or a university town, I should say. So then I started getting really interested in Indian music around that time. And I was very attracted to the teachings of the Sufi musician Hazrat Inayat Khan, and particularly his book, which is a transcription of his lectures called The Mysticism of Sound and Music. And after reading that book, I was fortunate enough to hear about Pandit Pranath, who was a master Indian vocalist who was living in Berkeley, California, and I was living in Eugene, Oregon, which is about 10 hours drive. So I started driving down a number of times every year and taking lessons for a few days and then coming back and practicing. That really changed my whole approach to music, studying Indian music as well as studying Western classical music and jazz. Then the other kind of life-transforming experience for me was when I met Monte Young. So Monte Young is known by many people to be the founder of minimalism. He had a tremendous influence on Terry Riley, who was his best friend. So Terry Riley and Lamont are considered the founders of minimalism, and composers like Philip Glass and Steve Reich were very influenced by them. So it ended up that I wanted to study piano with Lamont because he was working with microtonal tuning, specifically just intonation. He invited me to New York to come and listen to his music and set me up in a loft with real tape player and like these speakers that were 4 feet tall. And I heard the latest recording of his last concert that he'd given in Germany, which was about 4 hours long. And I was completely blown away. I'd never heard any music, anything like that before. And I had no idea how he even created such incredible music on the piano because it sounded so completely different than the piano normally sounds. So fortunately, he needed somebody to tune the piano for his concerts. And I had, by that time, had some experience doing my own tunings. He was able to arrange for his foundation, his patrons, the Dia Art Foundation, to support me in coming to New York and working with him as his apprentice. So I tuned the piano for all of his concerts and sat next to him every time he composed and practiced, and really learned his music the way you learn Indian classical music, by watching and listening. So these were the life-transforming experiences that turned my music into something different than it had been before.
Oh, wow. It sounds amazing. Learning directly from Monte Young.
Yeah, it really was. And
Yeah.
it wasn't just about the music, it's about life, because when you study with a great teacher, you also see how they live their life. As in the traditions of Indian classical music, one is learning not just the music, but a whole way of life.
Could you tell us more about the relationship between Indian classical music and Western classical music, and how they interact with each other and how they influenced your works?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'll read you a few paragraphs from Hazrat Inayat Khan's chapter called The Science and Art of Hindu Music, to give you a little bit of an idea of the foundations of Indian classical music. Music being the finest of the arts, it helps the soul to rise above differences. It unites souls because even words are not necessary. Music stands beyond words. The art of Hindu music is very unique in its character, for all players and singers are given perfect freedom of expressing their souls through their art. And that statement underlies one of the main differences between Western classical music and Indian classical music, in that most of Western classical music, the performer has to play the notes on the page. And in Indian classical music, it's a system of structured improvisation. So one learns to follow their intuition and get into a deep state of attunement, and which is very different than if you're concerned about playing all the right notes. I'll continue reading. The character of the Indian nation can be understood through its spirit of individualism. The whole education tends to individualism, to expressing oneself in whatever form one is capable of. Therefore, in some ways to their disadvantage, in many ways to their advantage, they have expressed this freedom. Uniformity has its advantages, but uniformity also often paralyzes progress in art. There are two ways of life, uniformity and individualism. Uniformity has its strength, but individualism has its beauty. When one hears artists, singers of Hindu music, the first thing they will do is to tune the tambura to give one chord. And while they tune the tambura, they tune their own souls. And this has such an influence on their hearers that the hearers can patiently wait for 15 minutes. Once the singers find that they are in tune with their instrument, with that note, their souls and minds and bodies all seem to be one with the instrument. A person with a sensitive heart listening to this song, even a foreigner, will perceive the way the artist sings into that chord, the way the singer tunes the spirit to that chord. And by that time, a singer has concentrated. By that time, a singer is attuned to all who are there. Not only has the singer tuned the instrument, but the singer has felt the need of every soul in the audience and the demand of their souls and what they want at that time. Perhaps not every musician can do this, but only the best. And then they synthesize, and it all comes automatically. And as they begin their song, it seems that it touches every person in the audience, for it is all an answer to the demands of the souls who are sitting there. The singers have not made the program for the music beforehand and do not know what they will sing next, but every moment they are inspired to sing a certain song or play a certain mode. They become an instrument of the whole cosmic system, open to all the inspiration that comes, at one with their audience, in tune with the chord of the tambura. And it is not music only, but this phenomenon itself that they give to the people. That to me represents the ideal in music. And what's even more remarkable, this chapter that I'm reading from is a transcription from a lecture that was given in 1923 in San Francisco. Right? So it's 101 years old.
Oh, wow.
And it's way ahead of its time.
Right.
So what are some of the differences, some of the other differences between Indian classical music and Western music? So one we already touched on is notation. Western music is mostly composed, notated by a composer, intended to be performed by them or another performer. While as Indian classical music, there are compositions, but the compositions are short and they're structures or springboards for structured improvisation. Another difference is that the hallmark of Western music is harmony. And Western music, from a very early time, starting even in the 13th century in the Notre Dame school of France, focused on different voices singing at the same time and the harmonies that they would create. Also on polyphony, on having strands of melodies all happening at the same time. Well, this idea doesn't really exist in Indian classical music. Indian classical music, the melody is the primal thing, and the melodies, the melodic forms we call ragas, and then the complex rhythms that support the ragas. But one doesn't have the same sense of chords or harmonies moving through time that we have in Western music. Harmony still exists because you have the drone, and so even if you just sing one note against the drone, you're creating a harmony. So the different notes of the melodies as they interact with the drone create different harmonies. But you don't have a harmonic progression in the same way that you would in any piece of Western classical music or in most popular songs, for example. Obviously, a lot of the instruments are different. The primary instruments in the West are the voice and the piano and string instruments like the violin, cello, and viola. Also, in Western music, we have the orchestra. So there's a lot of emphasis placed on musicians playing together and having a large number of instruments to choose from for the composer to orchestrate. This relates to the reading I just gave from Inayat Khan, this idea of uniformity versus individualism. Indian classical music is very much about individualism, about a soloist who is unfolding the ragas over time with the support of accompanying musicians. But even though there are small orchestras. There's nothing like what we have in the West, where you have a large orchestra and a skilled composer orchestrating and using all the instruments of the orchestra in very rich and complex ways. So that's another fundamental difference, I would say. And another, really important difference, which actually gets overlooked and people don't talk about as much as they should, is that the tuning system is entirely different. And when I first discovered this, it was really a life changer for me, because I was so interested in Indian music and I was playing the piano and singing ragas. And after about a year of singing ragas every day with the tambura, I noticed that the piano sounded out of tune. So I studied the physics of sound and realized that the way the piano is tuned is in a compromised system where the harmonic resonances, the naturally the most in tune notes that exist in any key, are compromised so that the notes can be equally spaced. And that doesn't happen, that's called temperament. And that doesn't happen in Indian classical music. The musicians all play in a key that suits their voice or their instruments the best, and then the tuning finds the perfect relationship for each pitch in relationship to the drone in that key. And so Indian classical music never needed temperament, and Western classical music, which developed so that musicians could play in any different key, required temperament so that one could modulate and transpose between different keys. And also even harmonies, just the nature of triadic harmony is such that you can't have all the chords perfectly tuned in one key. So even the harmonies that we use require some form of temperament as well. And that really changes the nature of the music, because temperament takes away from the natural beauty of sound, the natural beauty of harmonic resonance. And so it requires that the music move a little faster and that the music has more interesting intellectual ideas and doesn't have to depend so much just on the beauty of sound. While as in Indian classical music, in Drupad, which is the oldest form of Indian classical music, one of the teachings is that sound is more important than melody. So vocalists spend a lot of time developing the sound of their voice and the attunement of their voice and the perfect tuning of their voice in relationship to the tambura, which is considered even more important than the improvisations and the melodies that they create.
Wow. So then in India, Indian classical music, a lot of vocalists, they focus on the foundation, like actually making the sound.
Very much so. But especially in Drupad, which is the oldest style of music, which has been continuing for, I don't know how many generations, but at least 1,000 years in the same lineage, for example, the Dagar lineage.
I noticed that, you mentioned just intonation and how you were influenced by your dad, and who is a mathematician. And I see a lot of scientists and mathematicians who are also musicians. And I wonder if there's any like a relationship between science and music, or math and music.
Absolutely. There's a beautiful quote. I forget who it's from, but I can look it up if you want to know. But it's from the 1600s. It's around the time of Bach. But it wasn't Bach. It was a German polymath who said that music is the arithmetic of the soul, unaware of its own act of counting. And if you think about it, almost every aspect of music relates to mathematics. So rhythms certainly are different subdivisions and proportions of dividing time into mathematical proportions. And every different note creates, well, especially when tuned in just intonation, it creates a whole number proportion in its relationship to every other note. And the more simple the whole number proportion, like 3-2 or 4-3 or 5-4, the more harmonious it sounds. And the more complex, like 45-32 or 64-63, then the more dissonant it sounds. So every melody or every harmony is like a mathematical formula. Equal temperament, by the way, for those who aren't aware, is how we tune most Western instruments in the piano today, where all of the notes are equally spaced and the octave is divided into 12 equal proportions. The notes no longer create these perfect whole number proportions, but they all create multiples of the square root of 2, of the 12th root of 2, actually. Because when you divide the octave into 12 equal parts, each one is the 12th root of 2, just a multiple of the 12th root of 2. So it actually becomes even more complex mathematically. But the soul experiences this kind of mathematics, even if you don't understand it or you can't count it. We experience the subdivisions in time and rhythm, and we experience the harmonies and melodies as being kind of some kind of sacred geometry that has a effect on us universally. Even people from different cultures who aren't used to a music of a certain culture or don't know the language, we can all communicate and understand each other through music. In fact, better than we do through language.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think music actually makes us one because we don't need to speak, we don't need to use any other languages. So I think that's why I like to do music. Do you have any upcoming projects, or do you want to share anything about your recent projects that you did?
Sure. So the project I've been working on the last few years, I'm calling Raga Cycle. And the ragas of Indian classical music correspond to different 2 or 3 hour windows in the 24-hour cycle. So for example, there are early morning ragas, mid-morning ragas, late morning ragas, evening ragas, midnight ragas, throughout the whole 24 cycle. So my goal is to record at least 24 different ragas that correspond with each hour of the 24-hour cycle. And I'm working on this project in a number of different ways at the same time. Part of it will be a series of recordings that you can just listen to the music. And so I'm doing these recordings mostly with an ensemble that I'm a part of, which includes I'm playing just intonation piano and composing and arranging a lot of the music. Ina Philip, who is a Brazilian singer living in Quebec, who studied Drupad in India for many years. She's the primary vocalist. And what she does that's really special is she also uses the recording studio to layer her voice in different harmonies so that you get polyphonic and rich harmonic textures with the ragas, which is something that is quite new and not traditionally done in raga. And I'm doing the same thing on the piano, harmonizing the ragas as well. And then Elliot Cole, who you know very well, he's a master composer and multi-instrumentalist and vocalist. So he's playing synthesizer and working on the compositions and arrangements and doing some of the vocals in the ensemble. And then Benoit Roland, who is a French electroacoustic composer and sound designer, is working with computers and electronic textures and taking samples from us live and doing all these amazing electroacoustic sound design. He's Ina's husband, who also lives in Quebec. And then we have Mir Naqibul Islam, who is the best tabla player from Bangladesh and also plays with the Brooklyn Raga Massive. And so he's our tabla player. So we're in the process of recording our first album now, but we already recorded 9 hours of music with ragas that correspond from 10 in the morning until 7 p.m. And these were featured in an installation called Passage at the Turchin Center for the Visual Arts in Boone, North Carolina for a 6-month spatial audio installation. So we have a lot of material we've already developed that we're going back and reworking and recording for this series of albums. And there's also a media component to it as well that we're, of course, collaborating with filmmaker Bill Morrison. On this stage of the project, we call 24 Hours at Once. And the concept is that Bill is taking a live feed from a camera or source in all different 24 time zones around the world. And we're even trying to set up one in a satellite in outer space so that we can view the Earth and view things from outer space as well, which would be like its own time zone outside of the 24 time zones of planet Earth. And we're doing the first prototype of this, which will be a 6-hour performance at the Crave Lab, which is a virtual reality lab at Rensselaer Polytech Institute in Troy, New York, on September 14th. And Bill will be having his 24-hour projections and doing live VJing while we give a 6-hour performance from our raga cycle.
Oh, wow. Sounds so interesting.
And there'll be more performances and recordings coming. So it's just the beginning of what will be most likely a decades-long project. What I love about this project is that it brings together all the things that I love the most in life and in music. Obviously, it's a collaboration. I love to collaborate with other musicians and visual artists. I get to play my main instrument, which is the piano, and I get to do it in just intonation, which is my great love and specialty. I get to incorporate the ragas of Indian music. I get to compose music for the project, and I also get to improvise within the structures that we create. I get to sing and work with other vocalists in the project as well. So it incorporates all the things that I love most in life and music.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, you look so happy when you're talking about this project. Let me ask you this question. If you could define happiness in one sentence, how would you define it?
I would say having the opportunity or making the opportunity to live your life in the way that you love the most. You know, so much of our life, we end up doing things that we don't want to do, like taking on certain jobs to make a living. And many people don't have the good fortune to have a job that they love. I think that creates a lot of depression and unhappiness. So it's not always easy, but if we can carve out a life for ourselves where we're doing the things that we love to do the most, then I think that's a natural recipe for happiness.
I like that. Do you have your own practices or methods that you do to stay happy?
I do, actually.
Could you share with us?
Sure, I'd be happy to. The first thing I do is every morning I play the piano and sing Indian ragas for 1 to 2 hours. And I do that really for the love of it, not so much to develop my musical ideas or to develop things for performance or for my career, but just for my own spiritual unfoldment and also for my own musical and intellectual pleasure. And I start that practice by singing long tones. So I sing on one note with the drone for a long time, and I gradually go lower into my range until I reach the lower notes that I can. So it's like a pranayama breathing practice too, where I'm taking a deep inhale and breathing very deeply and then singing for a long exhale. And so it's a form of meditation through music, where I'm concentrating on the drone and singing different notes in tune with the drone. So that's my main practice, actually, and I've been doing that for many, many years. And I go from that practice into singing different raga, whatever raga that I'm working on at the time. So I'm learning and developing my approach to ragas at the same time. And I do it both with the voice and the piano, so that I'm keeping my fingers warmed up and learning new patterns at the piano, and also developing my voice and feeling a real deep connection to the music, all with the same practice. When I'm in my rhythm, following my routine, I spend most of my mornings composing and practicing. So I get to do what I love to do. Usually I spend most of my afternoons teaching or taking care of administration, and emails and things I have to do for my music career. I also try to do yoga most afternoons. I really enjoy just feeling very tuned in through a deep yoga session and breathing session. So I try to do that as well, and keeps my body in balance, my mind in balance. And then I try to go back to music most evenings and spend more time composing and practicing.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. And you've been teaching Indian ragas. I wonder if you want to share that with our subscribers.
Yes, I'd love to. And in fact, I'll make a connection between your previous question and the Indian ragas and the teachings and the class that I give, which is that you asked what I do to stay happy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very aware that we're really facing an epidemic of major proportions of unhappiness and suffering and depression in the world. But shockingly, very much so in the country that I live and that you're living now in, United States of America. United States of America is the second worst country for mental health in the entire world. There's so many people suffering from depression and anxiety, and the suicide rate is very high. So I think it's really important that we find as a culture things that we can do that can bring us into a more peaceful state of mind and to solve some of these mental health and depression problems. So I'm actually going to read from the last 2 or 3 paragraphs from the same chapter, The Science and Art of Hindu Music by Inayat Khan, because he presents an antidote to depression. The object of Indian music is the training of mind and soul, for music is the best way of concentration. When you tell a person to concentrate on a certain object, the very act of trying to concentrate makes the mind more disturbed. But music, which attracts the soul, keeps the mind concentrated. If one only knows how to appreciate it, to give one's mind to it, keeping all other things away, one naturally becomes developed in the power of concentration. So that relates directly to my morning practice that I was explaining to you earlier. Besides the beauty of music, there is that tenderness that brings life to the heart. For the fine, life in the world is very trying. For a person of fine feelings, for a person of kindly feelings, the life of the world is trying. It is jarring, and it sometimes has a freezing effect. It makes the heart, so to speak, frozen. In that condition, one experiences depression, and the whole life becomes distasteful. And the very life which is meant to be heaven becomes a place of suffering. If one can focus one's heart on music, it is just like heating something which was frozen. The heart comes to its natural condition, and the rhythm regulates the beating of the heart, which helps to restore health of body, mind, and soul, and to bring it to its proper tune. The joy of life depends upon the perfect tune of mind and soul. That's such a powerful statement, that the joy of life depends on the perfect tune of mind and soul. And of course, it also relates to how we tune our music as a culture, and the differences between how we tune our instruments in equal temperament and how music sounds and resonates when it's tuned in just intonation, and the effect that has on our body and on our mind and on our neurological system. So you asked about the classes that I teach. So every semester I start a new series of raga classes, and we usually go for about 10 weeks. And we go in depth in one raga. Ragas, when you first study this music, you can study even one raga for a number of years. So the goal is to get to know one raga really deeply rather than to get to know a whole lot of ragas. For example, doing a survey class where you would do 10 ragas in one class. And I found that if we do one raga for 10 weeks, that most of the participants in the class really get to know that raga very well, so that they can sing a few compositions and improvise in the raga and really have a deep understanding for what it's about in a way that it becomes a part of their musical life. If anyone's interested in the raga singing classes that I teach, they're available through an organization called Arts, Letters, and Numbers. So also, I'm very interested in creating a musical community. So in the classes, we have participants from different parts of the world, including right now, one of our participants is a musicologist and scholar from Kiev in Ukraine. So we attract people from different parts of the world, and we all come together with this common interest in Indian classical music and how studying and singing Indian classical music can transform our lives and give us a deeper appreciation of the different traditions of music that happen around the world, and something that is very contrasting and a different approach to what we're usually trained, how we're usually trained in the West.
Yeah, you have a really nice, intimate community.
Thank you. I'm glad that you've been a part of it over the past year. It's really wonderful to have you in the class and to see how you're growing and expanding and sharing what you're learning with the world through these podcasts and through your newsletters.
Thank you. How can our subscribers connect with you and learn more about what you do?
Well, to start with, I would say I hope that your listeners will listen to some of my music. And my music is available on all the major platforms on Spotify, Apple Music, through downloads. Record label that most of my recordings on is Cantaloupe Music. And so you can also download the music or order the CDs from Cantaloupe, as well as Amazon, of course. I have a lot of videos and recordings available on YouTube. I have my own YouTube channel. So if you just go to YouTube and search Michael Harrison, you'll find that. And there's various playlists of videos and recordings of my music. You can find out about concerts and what I'm doing through my website, michaelharrison.com. And I teach mostly through an organization which I mentioned before, Arts, Letters, and Numbers in upstate New York. So they have an email list and a website where they show the different classes that I teach, the Raga class, and also the Creative Music Intensive, which is how we first met. Beautiful 2-week program with creative musicians from all different styles and backgrounds in different parts of the world that come together, and we all focus on creative music making for 2 weeks, as well as sharing meals and swimming in the lake and just enjoying being in each other's company.
Yeah, I had a great time there. It's a beautiful space, great company. Yeah, unforgettable memories.
Yeah, every year I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to work with so many amazing musicians. It's just a really nice thing.
So to wrap up this episode, I want to ask you if you have any final piece of advice to share with our subscribers.
Well, I think it's what I said before, which is to find a way that you can spend as much of the precious time in your life as you can doing the things that you really love. That can be challenging because we all have a human metabolism that needs to be fed and have shelter, and so we need to make a living. And a lot of times, the things that we do to make a living aren't the things that make us the most happy.
Mm.
But one can maybe adapt to find a way to enjoy whatever work one is doing, and then over time find ways to transform our lives so that we can spend more time doing the things that we really love the most and that we feel that are fulfilling our purpose in lives.
Yeah, definitely. I think if one can find a way to kind of do the work that they enjoy doing and make a living at the same time, I think that'll be the best. But I see that a lot of people don't have that. So I think that's why a lot of people are suffering.
I agree with you. And I had to work a number of other jobs myself as I was developing my music career over the decades. So I've been through that, but I kept my sight on the goal and ultimately was able to become a full time musician. But it took many decades, actually. I don't know. It's hard to say what exactly is the solution. I think it's different for everyone. Every person has a different path and a different calling in life. And so the important thing is to really do what we do best and try to find out what it is that we're the most interested in life and follow that passion. Because when we're doing what we're interested in life, we're naturally going to be happy. If we're not able to do what we're interested in, then it's very easy to get caught up in a spiral of depression and anxiety.
Yeah, that's true. Follow your passion and follow your gut.
I think another thing too is we need ways of getting out of ourselves because it's very easy to get caught up in the storms in our teacups. And our whole society is geared towards narcissism now, where each of us as individuals can easily get so caught up in our own needs and desires. And so it's very important to find some way to care for other people and let go of our own preoccupations with ourselves. Studying music can be a great way to do that because one gets absorbed in the study of music and has the opportunity to engage with other students or teachers in the process. Of course, collaborating with other musicians and other artists is a fantastic way to do that. And service, selfless service, like having the opportunity to work in a charitable organization and volunteer service is a fantastic way to do that. In fact, they've done studies on longevity, and these are two of the keys to longevity. Besides exercise and diet, being part of a community is really, really important because it brings happiness.
Right.
And people that volunteer and help other people out live longer and healthier lives. And people that have a sense of purpose in life also live longer and happier lives as well.
Yeah, definitely. Find the purpose of your life is really important, I think. I see that a lot of people are searching for it. I believe that, like you mentioned, if we follow our gut feelings, we'll be able to find the purpose. Thank you for sharing your story and your daily practice. And thank you so much for joining us today, Michael.
It's been my pleasure, Soom. It's really wonderful to chat with you. And thank you for your insightful questions. And thank you so much for inviting me to be on your podcast.
Thank you. That's it for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're listening to this on a podcast platform, please leave us a review on the iTunes and Spotify. That's the best way to support us and help us reach more listeners like you. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, please leave comments down below. And if you enjoyed this episode, please hit the subscribe button if you didn't already. Also, to stay up to date, please subscribe to my newsletter on soom.substack.com. Okay, that's it. See you next time.